Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to have you here for today's webinar, Scaling Go-to-Market Without Breaking Quota Cash. My name is Hannah, and I will be your host for today's discussion. So this session will last about 45 to 50 minutes, and it will also be recorded. So you can expect the recording to land in your inbox within the next couple of days. Please feel free to send any questions throughout the webinar at any time, either in the chat or in the Q&A box. Now, let's move on to today's speakers. And rather than me introducing them, I think it's more fun and better if they get to introduce themselves. Kevin, would you like to start?
Preferably not, but I don't have a decision, I guess. Thank you, Hannah. Kevin, Commercial Director for Younium. Been in the fintech and SaaS industry for about 13 years, for the last few years, mostly running commercial departments. Yeah, that's about it. Perhaps, Martijn, pleasure to meet you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Martijn. I'm one of the co-founders of Bonana. We are a revenue operation agency. And the fun fact is that I was on most of the attendees' other side of the table here because I've been a go-to-market operator myself before I switched over to agency life. So I've run go-to-market teams between 1 and 10 million in ARR. So I have some scars about what we're going to talk about today. André.
Yeah, I think scar tissue is all our common denominator here. I am a go-to-market operator currently running revenue at AquaBlue, but I've also been 2 years in the fractional seat over the last 2 years. So a lot of different companies from 1 to 35 million in ARR. And I think it's going to be a great conversation here together.
Great, thank you very much. So before I hand over the stage completely, let's just take a quick look at what we'll cover today. So we'll start with a brief introduction to what revenue operation is and what kind of its role in scaling a SaaS company. From there, we'll explore some different go-to-market motions and the complexity that often comes with growth. We'll also look at a few specific cases, examples, and share practical insights. And finally, we will wrap up with a Q&A session at the end. And with that, I will hand it over to the speakers.
Yes, exciting. Curious what all topics will pop up. If only we would have prepared, right? But I would love to start with revenue operations. Martijn, perhaps I need you a little bit here. Just right to get started with, what is revenue operations, right? Start to end.
Yeah, exactly. It's always good to align on all of those buzzwords that you see on LinkedIn, right? You have go-to-market engineering, RevOps, revenue operations. Well, in the end, for me, it's about aligning tech, process, data, and the people. And especially the last part is super important. If you want to build a company, up until now, people were the main kind of asset that you need to do that with. Of course, we will have agents, and we already have agents. And I think that only multiplies the importance of revenue operations. But it's about making sure there's a clean process. People know what to do, when, how, and why, especially. And you have the underlying tech to support that. So that's the real infrastructure. And so that you can make sure that you all have the key data points at your disposal to, in the end, build a better go-to-market. But because, of course, it needs to, if you want a company, whether you like it or not, whether you're sales-driven or product-driven, sometimes you see a difference there. You need to get the pipeline in. You need to close that pipeline. You need to onboard. You need to make sure that they find the impact, the value, recurring value, so that they renew, so that you can drive your NRR, so that you can expand. I mean, and revenue operations is exactly that you can support that go-to-market throughout the entire bow tie that you can see on the slide, and make sure that your operators that are in the trenches with customers can focus on what they do best. I'm personally a big believer in the concept of zone of genius. And most of the commercial teams, they like to interact with customers. They like to have people on the phone to prospect. If you think about the left side of the bow tie, salespeople, they love to give demos, to do discoveries, to close deals. Customer success team, they want to be in the trenches with the customer and help them onboard the solutions. That's what they love. That's what they're good at. I think in the age of AI, that human interaction will only become more important at the right moment, of course. And for me, revenue operations is there to facilitate that, to amplify that zone of genius of the go-to-market teams, to make sure that the customers and prospects feel that you are committed to their success. And that it's all about effectiveness and efficiency, and to make sure that you have an operating machine on the sales, marketing, customer success side that can really scale moving forward.
Right. And what is those moments, right? When is it a good moment to start with RevOps? I think it's one of the most common asked questions around.
Yeah.
Do you see a particular moment, and is it dependent on your growth motion, when to start really digging down on that or doubling down on that?
Well, yeah, the classic consultant answer is it depends, right? But the more straightforward one is the sooner, the better. But it's super important that you don't over-engineer things. I mean, in the early days, you need to get to product market fit first. Then you need to get to go-to-market fit. What's the messaging, the positioning, competitive kind of analysis to make sure that your conversion rates are as high as possible, that you're able to build pipeline, to convert that pipeline, and then to make those customers successful. That should always be the focus at first. So don't over-engineer your RevOps in the early days. And that might sound strange, right? Because we do this for a living. But sometimes I see early stage startups at 1 million of ARR, and they ask us questions about workflows, automation, CPQ process, and we will dive into that. But sometimes I have to say, ho, ho, ho. I mean, focus first on finding that go-to-market fit. And then, of course, the moment you hit 3, 5, 7 million in ARR, depends a little bit on whether you are from Europe and versus from America. But this is where, in that journey, you need to make sure that you are step-by-step build out that revenue operations foundation.
Yeah.
Sorry,
André,
Kevin, what you will most probably feel. So it's not just about when is the right time, but how do you feel as a revenue leader when this becomes necessary, right? So it's more about, my team is a bit scattered. I don't see actually what's going on. I cannot feed them with the right kind of leads and companies, right? It becomes too much for me to run the day-to-day with the team. I don't get insights maybe outside of sales, which are now necessary as I have bigger teams. So this is how it goes a bit like I think from an engineering perspective, okay, you should do this by revenue X, or what is the feeling you currently go to? And this is exactly what Martijn then formulates with go-to-market fit.
Yeah, I completely hear you. Right, Martijn, we spoke a bit about this earlier, and I think it's a common conversation indeed, right? The over-engineering, but also under-engineering. And pipelines is one of those, right? Super important parts of this process. At some point, you want to, right, track as best as possible what is happening in our pipe, where is it happening, etc. But I guess, right, in one pipeline, that's not always possible for your entire company. Again, depends a little bit on what size you are. But what's your best advice, your best take on a pipeline, like, right? Typically, how many pipes are realistic, and where do you still get accurate measurements, and where does it become like we have 10 pipelines with one deal in each pipe, right?
Yeah.
What is your take on that?
Yeah, if we take one step back, it of course depends a little bit on the business model that you have. The typical pipelines that we see in professional services are completely different than the one that we see in B2B SaaS. And I think in this webinar, 99% of the people will be B2B SaaS, so I'm going to focus on that one. I think what the number one kind of rule of thumb that I always mention also internally to the consultants and to the market, to the people that I speak with, is you need to think about the buyer journey. Right? And you need to make sure that you build your sales process and the stages around that buyer journey. So then, to answer your question, the moment that you, in that bow tie, have different buyer journeys, you need separate pipelines because you want to measure things separately. So very concrete, what we often see is a pipeline for new business, acquiring new logos, a pipeline for expansion, right? So upsell or cross-sell, right? Depends on whether you're multi-product or not. And then typically also a renewal pipeline, and we might deep dive into that one as well. And then another dimension is how many different go-to-market motions are you running? because the way you do PLG is completely different in your CRM setup, whether that's HubSpot, Sales, or Pipedrive doesn't really matter, but it's completely different than when you have a more transactional sales-led motion versus a real enterprise upmarket motion.
Makes complete sense. I hear you. And right, to get a little bit more like hands-on, what is one of those common pitfalls that you see when you enter a project at first?
Yeah. A very short one, but it's more on the left side of the bow tie. It doesn't really is the topic of today's, but I see a lot of companies struggling with finding a way to feed leads to the SDRs, BDRs, AE that needs to do outbound and make that super efficient. And they expect, it's this job of sales to build lists. No, it's not. It's the job of sales to talk, to reach out, to interact with the market, not to do admin stuff. So that's a very common kind of misconception, in my opinion. Then if we move a bit more to the central side, and especially if we talk about quote to cash, is how to build your product groups, your line items, and how to manage that. People completely underestimate what you can fuck up if you don't set that up correctly early days, because it will have massive impact later on. I've seen even CRM setups where line items were kind of designed as properties on the deal object.
Yes.
I mean, that's a complete kind of mess up because it will fuck up your entire and pardon my language, by the way. I don't know if I could say it like that. But that's a real big mistake that you can do. But you have a couple of other ones as well, like your stages are completely wrong designed, and you have this kind of on hold stage in a deal pipeline, which becomes a graveyard later on with old deals, and that kind of messes up your forecasting kind of mechanism, especially in the age of AI, right? These are two that are top of mind.
Yeah, you were mentioning a few things that we encounter so often. André, please elaborate.
Yeah, I just wanted to give like two war stories here. As Martijn mentions this, I had one customer where we had an on-hold pipeline with a lot of deals, and we actually killed over like a couple of weeks' time, almost 3.5 million in pipeline. And so like, because this is literally a stage where nothing is happening anymore, right? So a deal pipeline is supposed to be like a workable deal with next actions. And that, of course, hurt a lot, but you get a lot of clarity after. And in another example, a company was struggling with line items, which they didn't use. So they didn't have any insights into what kind of products are actually selling. What we can do now, of course, is to have a Cloud Connect and then go into the emails in these deals and understand, okay, what kind of products are mentioned in these setups, but this is literally not the ideal scenario, and also nothing everybody can do yet. But it's very, very painful because this is where revenue breaks already before.
Yeah, completely.
I have a third one, which is also quite, and I experienced myself, by the way. So this is a real personal war story, and that is about RevOps. Kind of sales and finance misalignment. I mean, back in the days, in my first leadership position as a VP sales, at some point a CFO came in, and I didn't really treat that CFO as a go-to-market partner. He started pushing on things that I didn't feel comfortable with. I also didn't have a lot of experience, and I didn't embrace that challenge to say, hey, how can we now together do what's best for the company, not only for my own target. Because that's an important nuance there, right? Yes, we need to hit targets, but yes, we also need to make sure that the numbers are correct, that we build something that's scalable, and making sure that sales embraces that relationship with finance early on. And that means that a couple of things. And you need a CFO that understands the business and sales and doesn't only look at the financial perspective, but that also means that sales leadership needs to understand that financial aspect as well.
Completely agree. Couldn't agree more.
What was the moment you realized this?
Yeah.
Well,
Martijn, what was the defining moment then for you?
Well, we started on the wrong foot in that sense that he came in and immediately wanted to change the commission scheme. And of course, I got huge pushback from my own team around that, and I probably didn't handle that very well, to be honest. But that, of course, created that tension. But then later on, we went into a project to fix the way that we handle renewals, the billing, and all of that. And back in those days, we were in Salesforce. And then I really noticed when the CFO dived in, what a complete fuck up it was on our side on how we handled renewal, how we reported on churn. And then I realized, fuck, we actually need a CFO here. Because I cannot do it, CEO cannot do it. So it's the right call to hire an experienced CFO. And yes, he's gonna push where it hurts, but that's how you improve. And the moment that we saw the impact on how the delta in what we thought our churn number was versus the real churn number, I was like, oh shit, this is not good.
You touch upon interesting titles there, because I think we all, right, been in business for a while, and when we started, there were CEOs and there were CCOs and there were CFOs. But I don't know the exact number of years, but since a few years, we see a new C-level pop up, which is the CRO. And right, ideally, the CRO is the bridge between, right, the commercial operations, the final operations, the entire streamline. What would you say is the moment of a CRO to join? Because, right, what I typically see is that at some point a RevOps department is created. Typically, let's say, right, either it starts with a consultant or maybe even already, right, VP RevOps. But what is that typical moment where you say, okay, there's now a CRO involved, right? That we need this job title.
Yeah, there's also something that's really happening, and that's called title inflation, right? And I've also been part of that, because you want that VP title, and then you manage a sales team of 3 people. I mean, that's not really being a VP sales, but you have that title. But that being said, it's a little bit the same on the CRO side of things. Is you have true experienced CROs that have enough experience in managing sales, marketing, customer success, the financial side of things, but they're very, very rare. So in my opinion, what the right moment is to have a CRO is the wrong question. It's more about what skill set, what competences do you need for which phase of your go-to-market journey. I mean, you have CROs that have a background in sales, and I think that it's the majority. But more and more, you also see very analytical CMOs dive into the CRO position because they have a very data-driven approach. And typically brand and building pipeline is actually the true challenge. And that's what CMOs typically are very good at. And then you have the last bucket, which is you have very good head of RevOps that start to grow into CRO position. But it really depends for me on what is the bottleneck in the company that you currently have in your go-to-market. And based on that, you try to find that person. And yeah, if you then want to give that person the CRO title to grow into that responsibility to be accountable across the entire boat line, fine. But you need to tackle the problems first, not just hire a CRO so that you have a CRO, right?
Yeah, hear you. Perhaps André.
Yeah, to be fairly honest with you guys, I think 80% of CROs are just VP sales in a different title, and they add almost zero value in cross alignment, neither to the marketing side nor to success side. This might be an unpopular opinion, but most CROs I'm talking to clearly come through the sales angle, right?
Yes.
And don't necessarily have even experience in either of the other domains, marketing or success. And the really good CROs I see could actually come from a RevOps perspective, but like I think we're a bit early in the journey here, but have been in some kind of different function before, right? I had really great CSMs, which started with me, which became actually head of marketing and then head of revenue or CRO. I hired an SDR who became like a head of success. So I think if you have these cross-function understandings of the actual like problems customers then face in the different parts of the customer journey, this is where the value is, right? And it's, as Martijn said several times, outside facing towards the customer journey, but then also inside facing on how do we think about numbers, like inside customer journey, bow tie, churn, renewals, a pipeline, and so on.
And you touched upon
Kevin,
Yeah.
Kevin, from your perspective, because of course, I mean, you're talking now to
Yeah.
one agency owner, one CRO, and ex-consultant. From your perspective, from your kind of world, how do you see that?
Yeah, so you touch upon something super interesting that we spoke about before, right? Very often RevOps and right, CRO, VP, RevOps, however, right, we entitle that. They come from a commercial perspective, which, right, I share as a commercial director. And that's good, that's necessary, that's needed. However, I would say, and I'll give you a compliment on stage, André. We've spoken before, right? Was it a year ago? I think a super strong CRO, or again, VP RevOps, or whatever the title is someone that takes the entire picture into consideration. Because it's fantastic if you're right, CRM, your entire RevOps operation works fantastic. But if it's not related to actually getting cash in your bank account, then what's the actual point of it, right? Which brings me maybe to a point, Hannah, I'm not sure if you're still with us, but I think we have a slide where we talk a bit about tech stack. Exactly. Because this is how I would see the typical, right? The ideal scenario of a tech stack, a quote to cash operation. So in this case, right, on the left side, we've got a CRM system, HubSpot, Salesforce. Centralized there is very often spreadsheets or a homegrown system, or of course, right, with a big wink, perhaps Younium. And all the way on the right side, there's right payment gateways, billing gateways, ERP systems, etc. The thing is, one of those common pitfalls that I see is HubSpot being over-engineered to a point where it's almost desired to be a financial system. And I think that's one of those right areas that you mentioned before, Martijn, where sales and finance typically either miss a line or expect too much from a certain system to cover that. Yeah, immensely important that right, one of those examples is buying point solutions. Having a CPQ that is very expensive, like let's take a dealer or a Bonana or any of those kind of solutions that create a fantastic quote, but leaves more of a mess than anything for finance because they don't correlate to either line items or nothing financially related. And that's where I see a lot of mistakes being made and a lot of potential clients and clients coming to us with questions around that.
What are the things they're seeing then? Is it like, hey, I don't really know like when my cash comes in and what is open, like more on the accounting side from a revenue perspective? Or is it, hey, there's a lot of stuff happening now after sales that we have more expansion deals or like different complexities? Or is it this like, okay, I need to get my house in order because now I feel I have different line items, I have different go-to-market motions, like how, like what is happening in these companies at this time?
Yeah, so I think the both of you can agree that you cannot make accurate decisions if you don't have accurate data, right? That's where, right, it starts
Never
with.
heard about that.
I think we can all agree on that. And the thing is, as soon as right something is being closed as an opportunity, as a deal in the CRM system in HubSpot, for instance, and this comes over to finance, and anything changes after that typical handover, right? The first invoice is being sent out, customer replies to finance like, hey, there's a mistake or something is wrong, and they need to do an adjustment. That will never be reflected back in HubSpot. So let's say, right, something changes, the customer is live, they paid a certain amount, and because in B2B SaaS, we tend to focus on the success of our customers, right? We've got customer success departments or account management, whatever the name, right, is in your organization. And we have to believe if our customers are successful with our software, they will buy more of it, more seats, more legal entities, right? Whatever your business model is. But if your starting point of the conversation with your potential client is wrong data. So you're not quite aware what actual products do they have. Do they actually pay for it, right? Is there revenue leakage, etc.? If that starting point is off, then yeah, I would argue you get into interesting conversations and not to even start about your accounting, right? Is your revenue recognition in order? What is the actual MRR on this customer? I think, Martijn, you mentioned a few of those examples. What does it mean if the MRR or CMRR, maybe a new number for some of our watches, if that's inaccurate in HubSpot? What is the result of that? That's perhaps the question.
Yeah, like I think there's a big difference in who you're then talking to. If a business just hired a very knowledgeable RevOps person figures this out and sees the pain for themselves primarily and also for the customers, right? I think it's almost a lost battle to really attack this, because unless it's on the agenda of the CEO who feels these pains, it's quite a neglected area, I believe. So because like if I'm the CEO, I have so many different things on my mind where I build a go-to-market, we have expansion, we have all this stuff going on. I don't freaking care if my MRR is also on HubSpot and also in another tool, right? Like we're invoicing, we're good. I think the moment of realization here is when you're in the board meeting and they're kicking you in the face for not knowing your NRR number, not knowing your gross retention, or bringing inconsistent numbers across different board meetings, not understanding where churn comes from, what kind of segments those are, not differentiating go-to-market motions you might have based on revenue and then unit economics. So I think, of course, this is not relevant when you are at 500K in ARR, right? But they're getting like really relevant really quickly as you grow, and not recognizing that point as a CEO, I think is a huge trap, even though you have maybe a RevOps person who has this top of mind.
Exactly. And right, I asked you before, and you mentioned, what is one of those first questions that you ask when you get into a new project, right? To a CEO or to right, your direct reportee. And you mentioned, right, almost reverse engineering the revenue. How does that work when you don't know what the exact revenue is? Like, can you explain a little bit those conversations that you have around that, André? If we still have
I think
André.
he's freezing a little bit, but lucky I have a very strong opinion about this one as well. The very first question, I also did 3 years of fractional consulting, by the way, but the very first question, or at least in the first 5 questions, is always, okay, what is your ICP?
Right.
In what regions are you active? And then I start to dive into the numbers per ICP. And the moment that you are in a couple of millions in ARR and you don't immediately can answer that question, you actually know that you're running kind of blind.
Yeah. Yeah. But what is the result of running blind?
Yeah, you make
because
decisions
then
based
the
on gut
next
feeling.
step. Oh, sorry.
I think there's a little bit of a lag, André, but let me finish and I will wait a couple of seconds and then you can chime in, can chip in. I think if you don't have data, you need to make decisions based on gut feeling. And of course, entrepreneurs in the early days, they basically built a company based on gut feeling. So that's completely fine. But the thing is, when your organization grows, it takes more time to pivot a little bit, right? So the moment that you're on a couple of million of ARR, there's a way bigger risk if you make wrong decisions. So that's where data comes in and makes it super important. And the second thing is you typically also start to build a first line management team. And you want to equip your first line management with the right data so that they can become strategic. Because typically these are more junior people. So they need to still learn how it is to look at data, make decisions, implement certain projects that drive those decisions. And that's where building a data-driven foundation within your company at that stage is super important, because that will define the trajectory in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 million in ARR as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's how you tend to make decisions. If you're very early in your journey, you're making decisions for the day or for the week, right? And then you're guiding your team. When you're growing, you need to make decisions for this year or maybe also next year. So based on the insights we have on revenue, on go-to-market and product market fit, it's like, where do we build more product? Where do we see actually low adoption? What is the things in the market which are happening, which we're building against, right? So your whole operations, like I think what Martijn says with strategic just means to widen the aperture and also the timeline a little bit you're looking at. And if you don't have the right data, doesn't matter if it's quantitative or qualitative, you will not make the right decisions. And I think this is the trap you get into quickly. And like these kind of like setups you're just explaining are here to enable that, right? For the first line management, for the leadership team, and then for the overall company strategy.
Yeah.
And then Kevin, concretely, okay, this is the third time that I interrupt you, but what does a good setup actually looks like? Because we're talking quite theoretically here now about org design, overall strategy, go to market. But when you look into quote to cash, what does great look like for you?
Yeah, I hear you. So right there's many things that come into play. But the most important thing is typically you want to have sales working in HubSpot if we're talking about an SLG motion, right? If we're talking PLG, you should have something right on your website, a paywall that is fairly simple, getting deals in. There's a few side notes that you have to take in consideration, right? A part of what we want to talk about today is growth motions, where sales-led growth is simple in the terms of what should it do? Generate revenue, right? It should generate quotes and agreements. Secondly, we've got a PLG motion that is really popular at the moment, and I think everybody who's running PLG today wants to go to SLG, and everybody that's running SLG today wants to go into PLG. I would like to say that people think the other side of the PLG motion is greener. Let's see about that. I think you need data and some creative thinking, but we'll get into that in a bit to decide on that. But what is the reason for having a PLG motion like that? That's a big question, I would say, right? Do you actually think your product can sell itself online for a certain amount? And that's a business model. Or is this actually a lead generation tool? Do you want to give away free trials, and that is actually a pipeline generator for sales? So that's one of those questions that you should ask yourself to start with. But left or right, if we talk about a quote to cash setup, the most important thing is that you separate your CRM system from your financial system, however, have them integrated. I would say near impossible, super hard to do that with ERP directly into CRM, because in B2B SaaS, which we're talking about specifically today, recurring models, quantity models, tiered models, usage components, which we might touch upon later as well, right? Super complex. Legacy ERP systems really don't understand the complexity of that, especially when it comes to RevRec, etc. So ideally, what you want to do is at the moment of quoting, where sales gets in touch with the customer, if it's a PLG customer or an existing customer or a new customer, it doesn't really matter. And they are requesting an offer, right? So there's a base license, there's maybe an onboarding fee or consultancy hours, all of that. To make life for finance a bit easier and to, in the end, get cash in your bank account quicker, right? Cash is king always. You would like to do this with financial properties, and that doesn't mean you want sales to entail in what accounting rules should we apply or whatever, but metadata, as we call it, underwater data should already on quote level entail financial properties, because the result of that is sales just creates their quote as they do. But if underwater all the financial properties already exist in that quote and the customer signs that quote, or the prospect signs the quote, becomes a customer, you can activate your deal, so to say. You can activate your quote. So from there on, the process all the way to, right, when do we invoice? How do we invoice? How should we handle revenue recognition? What are the actual numbers on this contract, right? What is my contracted revenue on this order, on this subscription? But what is my actual revenue on this contract? All of these that I mentioned, that should be already on quote level. And I think if you don't do that early enough, it will just create more work and more, I would say, frustration, more error-prone situations in finance. So ideally, as soon as possible.
And I mean, imagine that you didn't do that. What are some of the symptoms between 1 and, let's say, 15 million in ARR or something like that? That when you have those systems, you know that you really need to take action.
A lot depends, of course, on, right, ARPA growth rate is a super important one, right? If you grow 1% year on year, then yeah, it's cumbersome, but you can manage. But if you get above, I would argue 15, 20% year on year growth, that means a lot of contracts. Again, dependent on your ARPA, but even if the ARPA is low, then it depends on super complex contracts, right? Typically, if the ARPA is high, the contract is complex. So a lot of line items with maybe different start dates, end dates, discounts that run differently in the same contract. So common scenarios, what you see is that finance starts to get a lot of admin, unnecessary admin, that is. On top of that, revenue leakage, common scenario. Very important, right? Inaccurate numbers. Assuming this is your MRR, but realizing a few months down the line, well, if it's higher, that's great, right? But if it's lower, that's a proper discussion. And again, the bottom line of that is even potentially, right, wrong audits, year-end closing, month-end closing being a huge hassle. But all the way, the bottom line is company evaluation.
And of course, you're seeing this really from an internal perspective, right? And you see all those friction points and all the struggles you're running into. But now imagine also the customer perspective. You get wrong invoices, they're too high, they're too low, they're not regular enough, this is not what we bought, there's different products. So there's a lot of stuff actually. I'm always looking at the customer journey, right? Like, I understand the pain internally, and we can, I think for a very long time, actually take care of the pain in some matter, right? But towards the customer, it's just unprofessional and will lead to a churn.
Exactly. I would be curious, since we spoke a lot about quote cash operation and a lot of hopefully hands-on on things and things that we experience in all of our meetings. Speaking about that, what we experience in all of our meetings, a hot topic, AI features, pricing models. I would love to hear your take on that. What do you typically hear, right? I would argue, right, there's a lot of new AI startups, right? AI tech companies that are natively either developed by AI or selling AI. But we also see a lot of, right, larger existing accounts that start to develop AI productizing. What's your take on the pricing models of those, and what do you hear? Maybe, Martijn, you can kick this one off first.
Yeah, there's a strategic topic there and an operational topic, and unfortunately they influence each other, and it blurs the judgment on that strategic discussion. So the strategic one, and I'm definitely not a pricing and packaging expert. I know a few if you want recommendations, but there it's all about having an agile approach. I mean, there's no one size fits all. You need to test things out, and all of the cliches there, just like with product market fit, go to market fit. It's the same thing with pricing market fit. You need to test shit out. right? So that's the easy advice there. But the problem is that a lot of companies are not that agile on the pricing side because of the operational hassle on how to do the quoting, the billing, and all of that, and that refrains them from being agile and moving fast. And that's the big challenge that I see in the market today.
Hear you.
Yeah.
André, your take?
There's two things you might see, right? Number one, all the AI companies have a lot of demand and inbound because it's native AI and like there's a lot of hype on it and there's a lot of budget for it. So they have a certain revenue model and billing model, and then you have the SaaS companies which are right now really drying up and have a lot of difficulties to actually create demand and then go through, right? So what I need now is to somewhat innovate with my like in the end, actually pricing and revenue model. So this is the basic of your whole business, right? And how are you able to do that if you don't have any visibility on data or the ability to actually change pricing and then inspect the changes it is doing, right? For the AI companies, this means right now maybe they have a business model which works, but will it work still in 6 months, right? And then how can I change price model, invoice model, and whatever? And for the SaaS companies, it means in what way can I recreate packaging of features and value capture of the delta to do that. You literally cannot do that if you're just working, if you're not even working with quote to cash, or you don't work with any kind of subscription setup, or you don't work with structured process in HubSpot.
Agree. Thank you for your insights on this so far. We're approaching, I guess, the end of our webinar, which would lead me to a question for Hannah. Hannah, do we have any questions from the audience today?
Yes, we do. So good thing to get started with them. So the first question we have is, at what ARR do most SaaS companies outgrow spreadsheets and manual billing for quote to cash?
I can take this one. So it's strange, but there's again consultancy answer. There's many criteria that come into play into this. Typically, I would see the majority of the companies that come to us first at a stage between 1 and 2 million and about 100 contracts. That's one key indicator. However, what is super important is the growth rate to that. Again, as mentioned earlier, right? If you have a 1% year-on-year growth rate, or maybe even negative, then things become sort of manageable, or right, it's not ideal, but with the hours that you can spend on it sort of works out. However, especially right in this day and age, there are companies that do, let's say, 20% year-on-year, 30%, or right, extreme cases, 70, 90%. Then you very often get into a moment of, right, okay, so it's not really ideal, it's not manageable, and there's a lot of errors, but do we hire somebody additionally for next year to keep on maintaining the spreadsheet, or do we start to automate the process? So that is happening at lower growth rates. The problem is when the growth rates are, let's say, above 60% or whatever, that it's sort of like you will need to hire 1 in 2 months and you need to hire 2 in 4 months, or right? You sort of need to lay out the hiring process to maintain your spreadsheets. And so that's super important, the growth rate.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other take on this? No? Then we have a second question too. We have, who should actually own quote to cash in a scaling SaaS company? Is it RevOps or is it finance?
André, I think this is a beautiful one for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I would come back to what we said earlier, right? You're thinking about like ownership before you're actually thinking about what problems we're solving. And I think quote to cash like needs to be owned by the CEO early on in order to make the transition you just explained, Kevin, from spreadsheets to structured setup. And then most probably you can hand it in somewhere where you often have a certain experience set. So for example, at some companies, I saw this clearly in finance hand because it's a PLG motion, all billing works over Stripe. Then integration could be quite straightforward, right? It could even be set up by RevOps if that person is doing actually also like the product setup of the Stripe. So I saw this in a lot of different ways. I think it's really about one, are we driving this topic on a strategic level? At the moment, it needs to get done. And then who can own this? Who has, one, the ability to actually drive this longer term? Two, who has the reach across departments and is not looking for just like one particular like stakeholder, like sales or success. And then three, how can that person then also understand the improvements we could do on this, right? This is not a project you implement once and then, okay, this is running now. This is a strategic tool to build your go-to-market. And I think it needs to be understood in that way.
I think one last thing to add, somebody that has time, right? It's typically a scenario.
Nice, thank you. And maybe we have time for one last question. So it goes like this. We're moving up market and starting to see more complex, highly customized deals. How do you manage that operationally without breaking your quota cash process?
Martijn, do you want to take the
last one?
go-to-market motion switch? I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really something that you need to handle cross-functional across the different departments. And the number one tip I would give there is to organize a decision committee. And yes, you don't want extra meetings, but if you're growing fast and you don't have that exactly under control, things will break. But the one thing that I would advise there is to organize some kind of deal desk where, especially in the early days, you discuss often and fast the friction that comes between sales and finance teams. And then if you have someone that can oversee that committee, and based on the feedback, you iterate and you come with proposals and you make it a project, then things will be fine. But just don't let a sales guy with a financial controller figure it out, because that's a recipe for disaster. You really make that a cross-functional kind of priority. And that comes back to what André mentioned. In the end, it's the CEO's job there. And for all the people in the room here, if you don't have the attention of your CEO around this, it's your job to wake him up. And you don't do that by just screaming, hey, there's a problem here, but you build a business case.
Yeah, and I want to tie this into the last comment Monica made here, because of course, Monica, you sitting like in finance, right? And there's other stakeholders maybe on the tech stack side for revenue. It's really important that this doesn't need to be like a one-to-one connect between the finance tech stack and the CRM. There is things in the middle, like called subscription management, like Younium, which are building the translation between those different systems, which help you to align that. But in order to bring this really together, you need to go one level higher with the CEO or with even the CFO, like whoever you're reporting to cross that bridge towards revenue.